The leather folder rested in front of me, heavy as a heartbeat. Inside were the deeds. My grandmother's 21st birthday gift, a $50 million hotel with my name written all over it. Before I could even catch a breath, the front door swung open. My mother stepped in, her new husband trailing right behind her. "We should run this together as a family," she said, smiling as if the world still revolved around her. I told her firmly, absolutely not. "I'm the owner now." Her smile vanished. "Then pack your bags and leave this house." I didn't argue. I didn't move, because I knew something they didn't. That night wasn't about their threats. It was about my grandmother's next move, one that would end their little performance for good. Today, people see the hotel, the gleaming marble floors, the glass lobby, my name etched in gold above the entrance. What they don't see is the chaos that once lived inside this family. My grandmother, Sharon Bennett, built all of it from a single roadside motel in Vermont. She was 21, the same age I am now, and everyone called her foolish. But she turned doubt into bricks, ambition into revenue. By the time I was born, the Bennett collection was a name whispered with envy. My mother, Brenda, inherited none of Grandma's patience, only her pride. For her, success wasn't about building anything lasting, it was about being seen. She adored camera flashes, more than blueprints, control more than family. My father, Mark, was the opposite. Calm, steady, a man who believed in doing things right, even if it took longer. He ran operations quietly for years, keeping the business afloat while my mother chased appearances. When I was 16, I watched that balance shatter. I remember the night my father left, suitcase in hand, eyes weary. "I can't stay where love has become a performance," he said. The silence he left behind filled every corner and never left. After that, Brenda remarried quickly. Scott Miller. Smooth-talking, business-savvy, all phrases like synergy and global expansion. Everything she thought success should look like. Shiny, loud, hollow. Not long after, she sent me to live with Grandma, claiming it was for stability. I knew better. I was simply one fewer witness. Life at Grandma's was calm, yet never boring. Her house carried the scent of cedar mixed with fresh coffee. Mornings began with the rhythmic clatter of typewriter keys. She didn't treat me like a child. She treated me like an apprentice. While I studied architecture, she showed me what legacy truly meant. Discipline, courage, risk, and the strength to begin again when the world declared you finished. At night, I'd sometimes find her poring over old property maps, her original sketches drawn meticulously by hand. She'd gently trace the lines with a tender smile and say, "Every building tells a story, Sophia. The walls remember who built them and why." At the time, I didn't realize she was speaking about people too, about the foundations we lay inside ourselves. Years passed. My mother's calls became shorter, her tone sharper. "You should come by," she'd say. "Scott wants to discuss the European market." I always had an exam or a project pressing, and the conversation would end with her sigh of disappointment. We were strangers, linked only by blood and legal ties. Until that morning, my 21st birthday, when Grandma invited me to sit at her desk. A leather folder rested there, heavy and foreign. She said, "This is your inheritance, but it's also your test." I didn't understand her meaning. Not yet. I would soon enough. Because sometimes the instant you receive everything you've ever wanted is also the moment you discover who's poised to take it away. Dinner that evening felt celebratory. Roasted lamb, candlelight flickering across the long oak table, and Grandma smiling in that rare, serene way. For once, the house was calm, filled only with the gentle clink of silver against china. I remember thinking, perhaps things were finally steady. Then the doorbell rang. It was a small sound, yet it changed everything. I rose, napkin still in hand. When I opened the door, the porch chill struck me first, then her perfume. My mother, Brenda, stood there in a cream coat, her hair perfectly curled, her smile thin and glossy. Beside her, Scott, her husband, the so-called consultant, radiated that smug confidence that always smelled like cheap cologne and lies. "Sophia," my mother said, her voice sugary, "happy birthday, sweetheart." We were just in the area and thought we'd drop by. Behind me, Grandma's chair slid quietly across the floor. They didn't bother waiting to be invited inside. Scott walked in holding a gift bag, the sort you hand over when you already expect something in return. Mom's gaze swept across the room and stopped on the folders still resting on the table. My inheritance. We heard about your little surprise, she said, voice dipped in sweetness with venom underneath. $50 million. How lovely. I forced myself to stay calm. It's not about the amount. Grandma wanted me to continue her work. Mom gave a soft laugh, flicking her manicured hand through the air. Of course. But running a business of that scale isn't something a child can manage. You'll need expertise, direction, which is why Scott and I thought we could take it on together. As a family. That word family stung like a slap. Scott leaned forward, gripping the back of a chair. It's too much for one person, Sophia. Let us support you. We've already prepared a proposal. Grandma's voice cut through him sharply. A proposal for something that doesn't belong to you. The room shifted. Scott's confident smile flickered. Mom shot Grandma a warning glare. The same icy stare she used to give my father. Mother, please, let's be reasonable. Reasonable. Grandma echoed, as if she were testing the flavor of the word. Like the time you mortgaged the Burlington property without consent? Or when you vanished for 6 months chasing expansion and came back buried in debt? The color drained from Mom's cheeks. That was years ago. Yes, Grandma replied softly. And I remember every year it cost me. I stood still, pressure tightening around my ribs. The room smelled like rosemary and resentment. Mom turned to me, her voice fragile. Sophia, don't let her turn you against me. We're family. We should rebuild together. I wanted to believe her, but her eyes kept drifting back to that folder. And I saw the truth. This wasn't about rebuilding anything. She wanted back the power she'd already lost. Grandma rose from her chair and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Dinner is finished, she said calmly. Some matters aren't open for debate. Scott cleared his throat and forced a polite smile. Naturally, we'll discuss this again soon. But as the door shut behind them, I caught Mom's final whisper. Quiet, sharp, meant only for me. This isn't over. And she wasn't wrong. The next morning, the house felt foreign. The light coming through the window seemed colder, thinner, as if the walls themselves sensed what was unraveling. Grandma spent most of the day in her study with the door closed. I could hear the soft, steady tapping of her typewriter, more rhythmic than my own pulse. Downstairs, I found the breakfast table already occupied. My mother sat there with a cup of coffee no one had offered her, flipping through one of Grandma's old accounting ledgers like it already belonged to her. Scott paced by the window, murmuring into his phone, phrases like potential restructuring and joint control. They didn't notice me at first, and for a moment I watched them. 2 trespassers dressed in the disguise of family. Mom finally lifted her gaze, her smile sharp and controlled. Morning, sweetheart. We were just tossing around a few ideas. You know how to keep the business steady. Steady? I asked, keeping my tone even. It's been steady for 50 years. She didn't respond to the jab. You're young, Sophia. You have school. Friends, you don't need to worry about payrolls or legal forms. That's what family is for. Scott nodded, his voice slick. Let us handle the tedious stuff. You focus on your degree. My pulse started to climb, but I stayed silent. Instead, I walked to the counter, poured a glass of orange juice, and let the quiet stretch until it felt almost unbearable. Then I turned to them. Does Grandma know you're here? Mom blinked, lips tightening. She's resting. Right, I said softly. Then maybe let her rest. Their eyes tracked me as I walked out, each step a silent challenge. That afternoon, I went to Grandma's office. She didn't look shocked when I told her what I'd seen. Just a quiet sigh. I was hoping they'd at least wait a week, she said. Do you want me to call the lawyer? I asked. She shook her head. Already done. She opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Another one identical to mine. There are things you don't know about your mother and Scott. Financial records, deals meant to stay hidden. My stomach tightened. Why didn't you tell me? Because sometimes, Grandma said, locking her gaze on mine, the only way to teach someone to defend What's theirs is to let them feel how easily it can be taken. The rest of the day passed quietly as we prepared. Grandma phoned her attorney while I sifted through old files, flagging transactions that didn't add up. The evidence was there: payments, transfers, ghost accounts. By sunset, the house smelled of coffee and dusted paper. Grandma looked worn but steady. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll invite them back for dinner. Let them think they've won." I nodded, understanding. If they wanted a stage, we'd give it to them. But this time, we controlled the script. The dinner invitation was Grandma's idea. A polite note sent that morning: dinner tonight. Let's discuss the transition properly. I watched her type, every word deliberate, precise. Bait disguised as civility. By 6, the table was set again. The same oak table gleamed under the light, candles standing ready to burn through deception. The house smelled faintly of roasted garlic and suppressed tension. Grandma had changed into her dark navy dress, reserved only for serious negotiations. Her face gave nothing away. "Stay composed," she murmured, setting a silver folder beside my plate. "Let them speak first." At 7 sharp, headlights swept across the gravel driveway. The front door swung open without a knock. My mother stepped in first, her heels clicking like a metronome of entitlement. She wore red, bold, deliberate, the color of control. Scott followed closely, his grin loose and wide. "Mom," he said sweetly, blowing a kiss toward Grandma's cheek. "Sophia." Mom's voice was smooth, but underneath it carried a sharpness like glass wrapped in velvet. "I'm glad we're doing this properly." Scott added, "Family decisions deserve transparency." I almost laughed at the irony. Dinner began in polite silence. Plates were passed, wine poured, but their impatience was palpable. Mom's fingers drumming on the table, Scott's eyes flicking repeatedly toward the silver folder beside me. Finally, Mom could no longer resist. "So, let's be honest," she said, putting down her fork. "Running a business of this size is complicated. Expecting a 21-year-old to manage it alone is unreasonable." Grandma sipped her wine quietly. Scott leaned forward, confident. "We've already laid out a plan. I'd handle finances, Brenda would oversee PR, and Sophia, well, she could shadow us for a while. Learn the ropes." Their words weren't suggestions. They were commands. I set my fork down. "You mean I'd hand over ownership to both of you, and you'd manage everything?" Scott's smile tightened for a fraction of a second. Grandma looked up, her expression unreadable. "And how exactly would that benefit Sophia?" I asked. Mom's grin widened. "It benefits everyone. We're family after all." That word, family, felt filthy coming from her. I drew a slow breath. "You're right," I said quietly. "We are family." Mom leaned back, satisfied. "Good. Then let's." That's when I interrupted. "It's time we stop pretending this is about love." Her expression froze. I pushed the folder toward the center of the table. "You want a transparency? Fine. Let's start with this." Scott reached for it, but Grandma's hand was faster. She opened the folder, her fingers tracing the first page. The sound of paper sliding echoed in the room. Crisp, final. "These," Grandma said, "are bank statements from the Burlington account. Withdrawals made under Brenda Bennett's signature. Funds that never returned." Mom's face drained of color. "Mother, that's absurd," she stammered. Grandma continued evenly, her voice calm, precise. "These are emails from Mr. Miller's consulting firm. Proposals for overseas expansion projects that never existed. Both of your signatures are on them." Scott's jaw tightened. "You had no right to do this." "I had every right," Grandma cut in, her voice sharp and unyielding. "You tried to mortgage the core hotels through shell companies, assuming I wouldn't notice." The room grew heavy, thick with tension. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound daring enough to break the silence. Mom's eyes flicked to me, panicked. "Sophia, this isn't true. She's twisting things. You can't possibly believe it." I didn't need to respond. Grandma slid one last document across the table. "The ownership amendment," she said. "Effective immediately. All control transfers solely to Sophia Bennett. You are removed from every board and trust." Mom stared at the page as if it might burst into flames. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have," Grandma said. Silence. Then the storm hit. Mom lunged from her chair, her voice breaking. This is my legacy. My life. You can't just give it to her. Grandma stayed seated, calm. You handed it away yourself. Scott gripped Mom's arm, muttering, let's just go. But she wasn't finished. No, she yelled, pointing at me. You think you've won? You're just a child pretending to be grown. You'll drown in paperwork before the month's over. I met her glare steadily. Maybe, but at least it'll be my mess. Her lip quivered, a mixture of fury and wounded pride. Then pack your bags and leave this house. The words, the same she had spat days ago, came out smaller this time. That's when Grandma laughed. A soft, knowing chuckle that cut through the tension sharper than any scream. You're right, Brenda, she said. Someone is leaving this house tonight, but it's not Sophia. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Even the fire's flames froze. Then Grandma reached into her purse and placed another envelope on the table. A court order. You've both been served. Fraud. Embezzlement. Conspiracy. The investigators are waiting outside. Scott went pale. You called the police. I called justice, Grandma replied simply. Mom staggered back, shaking her head. You wouldn't. I'm your daughter. No, Grandma said quietly. You were, until you sold this family's name for a mirror and a title. Two officers entered, silent, their presence firm yet polite. Scott didn't resist. He just stared at the floor as they led him out. Mom followed, her breath ragged, her eyes wide and empty. Caught somewhere between disbelief and despair, I sat frozen. When the door clicked shut, silence returned to the house, but it felt different this time. Lighter, purer, the kind that soothes rather than haunts. I sank into my chair, chest tight, hands trembling. Grandma rested her hand over mine. I'm sorry you had to witness that. No, I murmured. I needed to. She gave a single nod, her eyes glossy yet steady. You handled it better than I ever could. I glanced at the empty plates, the neatly folded napkins, the scattered traces of the storm we had just endured. Do you think she'll ever forgive us? I asked softly. Grandma sighed. Forgiveness is for those who acknowledge what they've done. Your mother still believes she was wronged. The fire crackled gently, casting golden light across the table. It struck me then. This house, the same one my father had walked out of years ago, where every argument had echoed louder than love, finally felt still. Safe. I rose and moved to the window. Outside, red and blue lights splashed across the driveway. Scott sat in the back of a cruiser. Mom stood frozen near the porch, mascara streaked down her cheeks. I didn't feel triumph. Relief didn't come. Only a quiet, deep ache for the family we might have been. Grandma came to stand beside me, her reflection merging with mine in the glass. You did well, Sophia, she said. You didn't raise your voice. You raised your worth. Her words settled in my chest like something lasting. As the last car disappeared down the hill, the night finally exhaled. We didn't toast. We didn't celebrate. We simply sat in the warm glow of the fire. Two women, survivors of the same bloodline in different eras, quietly breaking the cycle. The morning that followed felt almost unreal. The same house that had once rung with shouting now settled into a calm hush, the kind that follows a storm. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, falling on the folders still resting at the center of the dining table. The very one that had changed everything. Grandma was already in the kitchen, sipping her coffee as if nothing remarkable had occurred. Yet there was a difference in her posture, a softness in her expression, as though decades of burdens had finally been lifted. The news traveled quickly. Scott vanished from the state before the investigation could conclude. My mother, Brenda, lingered just long enough to witness her reputation unravel in every business circle she had once dominated. The fraud case took everything from her. Money, status, pride. Dad, Mark, arrived that afternoon. No speeches, no questions. He simply rested a hand on Grandma's shoulder and said, "You did the right thing." When his gaze met mine, there was no pity, only pride. Weeks later, life began to feel almost ordinary again. I completed my final architecture presentation and graduated at the top of my class. Grandma insisted we celebrate quietly on the hotel's rooftop. No press, no guests, just us. She lifted her glass and toasted to new beginnings. As the city lights shimmered below, I understood. This was a rebuild. Not of property, not of reputation, but of peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a leftover of someone else's legacy. I felt like the start of my own. I once thought legacy was defined by bloodlines and last names, but I've learned it's about boundaries. The courage to end what's toxic, even when it carries your DNA. My inheritance wasn't a hotel. It was freedom. If you've ever had to choose peace over family pride, share your story below. You are not alone.